Good morning. You're all very welcome to the NESC Shared Island event in association with the Department of Taoiseach. I'm particularly pleased to welcome the Taoiseach, members of the Oireachtas, the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Seanad, and His Excellency the Ambassador of the United Kingdom, Paul Johnston. This is our first hybrid event, and it is really great to see so many people here in the Hibernia Centre in Dublin Castle, as well as to know that we have so many attendees online. There's this fantastic energy, I think, that you get when you come into the room, so apologies for those online in that sense, but it is really great to be able to meet so many faces again and to have discussions that we've had already this morning. We really hope that everybody will be able to take an active part in today's discussion. Maybe you need to be reminded about this, but for the people in the room, it's simple. You just need to put up your hand. So there's no need to find the button on the bottom of the screen or anything like that. It's just raise your hand, and one of my colleagues will come to you with the microphone, and if you could introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. For those online, it's the same as we've been doing for quite a time now. Use the Q&A function in order to post a question, and my colleagues again here will pick up those questions and filter them up to the moderator on stage. Just to note, there is a QR code on everybody's desk. If you use your mobile phone, that allows you to access the NESC website, the programme for today, etc. And just also to note, the event today is being recorded and will be available on the NESC website in the coming days. I'd like to say that we really are delighted that the Taoiseach was able to join us this morning. As you all know, the Taoiseach is very committed to advancing the Shared Island initiative. In NESC, we were really delighted to be asked to be involved with this work. In my view, the Shared Island is a simple but very, very powerful concept. It assumes that people living in different legal or political jurisdictions respect each other and that they want and can work together. The awful human tragedy that's unfolding in Ukraine reminds us just how fortunate we are to be able to make that assumption. Having assumed that there's a willingness to cooperate, the Shared Island Initiative then sets about understanding how that cooperation is working and how policy in both jurisdictions and elsewhere might be reshaped over time to further support people and communities who want to work together. This was the focus of the NESC work, and today is a really important opportunity to reflect and discuss our report, Shared Island, Shared Opportunity. And we're in very safe and competent hands today. I'm delighted that Tommy Gorman has agreed to moderate our discussion. Tommy, as most of you will know, has worked in RTE for 41 years. The last 20 of those has been as Northern editor. So really, I think there is no better person to lead our discussion today. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry O'Connell, who's the director of NESC. I'm very conscious of the historic surroundings here today, and it's an honour to be among you, present in the room, but also our audience online. This place was part of our history long before we were born. My first time working here was in 1990, when there were two summits held during the Irish presidency. Interesting to think that really important discussions, fraught discussions about German reunification took place during that Irish presidency. 32 years later, we continue to live in interesting times. I'm going to try to get the most out of this occasion. The report is very significant, and we're going to try and absorb and share its contents today. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and for people online to ask questions during the different sessions. But to start off, I'm going to ask the report's main author, Helen Johnston, to give a brief background on the work and its recommendations. Now, Helen is a social policy analyst with NESC. She's from County Antrim, from between Ballymena and Dunloy, and she was formerly chair of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. So Helen, could I invite you to the podium? And Taoiseach, pardon my bad manners, I should have, of course, welcomed you. I'm so conscious of the weight you give to this occasion. The actual launch was postponed while you were dealing with COVID, and people recognised the significance that you attach to this project by the fact that the event was postponed in order to allow you to participate here in person. So Helen, could you please come and give us, say, some details of the recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy, and good morning, Taoiseach, and everybody here today in the conference centre and online. Following the launch of the Shared Island Initiative by the Taoiseach in October 2020, NESC was asked to undertake research and produce a comprehensive report on the Shared Island to inform the development of the Shared Island Initiative as a whole-of-government priority. We sought to contribute to building a shared knowledge base and in understanding possible ways in which greater cooperation could emerge across a number of economic, social and environmental areas in Ireland, north and south, and also between these islands, east and west. From the outset, we engaged in a listening and learning mode, seeking to engage with all the main communities and traditions on the island to build consensus around the shared future, with a focus on actionable areas of cooperation. The work has been underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. The work involved in excess of 100 meetings with practitioners, with policymakers, academics, and experts from a diverse range of institutions across the whole island. It also involved detailed work in the Northwest, including 4 focus groups. A public consultation on climate and biodiversity took place. The work also drew upon a number of related webinars and the Shared Island Dialogues undertaken by the Department of the Taoiseach. I'd like to thank everyone who gave of their time to participate and note the contribution in particular of Katrina Mullen, who facilitated the focus groups. In the course of the work, we have published 9 Shared Island reports on the economy, on regional development, on good jobs, on climate and biodiversity, on poverty and mental health. The report we are launching today, Shared Island, Shared Opportunity, has drawn on all of this work and makes 3 main conclusions. First, there is very significant support in practice for an all-island approach to key economic, social, environmental and well-being challenges. Second, climate change and biodiversity loss provide a clear and urgent platform for ambitious all-island action and collaboration. Third, there are key factors which are shaping current and future collaboration. These include having a shared agenda, resources, political certainty and support, legislative and regulatory coherence, and collaborative projects. The report makes recommendations in 5 areas: on the economy and infrastructure, on social policy, on climate and biodiversity, on well-being measures, and on statistical data. These will be discussed at today's panel sessions, and I'd like to thank all the panellists for contributing to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for kicking us off with great speed, great focus. So the Taoiseach and his department actually commissioned this report, this work by NESC. And it's my pleasure now to invite An Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, to give his response to the actual document, over 160 pages, and its recommendations. Taoiseach.
Thank you very much indeed, Tommy, and great to see you again here today. And I really appreciate the fact that you didn't do any overt lobbying on behalf of Sligo Rovers Football Club or anything like that, but we are keeping them in mind. And could I thank Larry for the introduction, and particularly to thank Helen and all at NESC for this very significant body of work. Just to say, I said to Helen as she sat down, I used to be a history teacher, not quite an English teacher, but you remember those questions in the exam, please summarise for us in so many words. But I think that was textbook in terms of precision, succinctness, in terms of the summary of the report. Thank you for that, Helen, and thank you for you and your team and all of the work that's been put into this, because I'm particularly pleased to be here at Dublin Castle this morning for the launch of the landmark report by the National Economic and Social Council on Shared Ireland and Shared Opportunity. For decades, as we know, the Council has played a vital role in public policy, as it does today, in undertaking strategic analysis of Ireland's position and prospects, assessing how we could do better in government and wider society on fundamental concerns, from sustainable development and climate action to housing and well-being. NESC has a unique voice and standing as a body independent of government, with a membership reflecting the interacting environmental, social and economic pillars of our society. Ken Whitaker, public servant, patriot and first chair of the preceding National Industrial and Economic Council in the 1960s, later wrote of the Council's work that he had no doubt that the intermeshing of cooperative study and action played a significant part in preparing Ireland psychologically and technically for the future. Today's report by NESC is very much a part of that canon. It guides us on what we need to be prepared to do to create a shared future on this island. Is obair ceann rodíoch íseo don chorla í a dhéanamh agus don rialtas í a áil a réin. Seo hí an chéad tuarascáil de chuid an NESC a bhfuil béim thiomnathe agus stratéiseach leagathe ar chur chuige ile iláin. Bhálam a bhíochas a chur anúil do chomhaltaí na chorla agus dúireann rúnaíochta an NESC as an taide agus rannpháirtíocht airsing atá déanta go le bliana nuas chun an tuarascáil cuimseach seo a chur i láthair an rialtas. This is truly groundbreaking work, both for the Council to conduct and for Government to receive the first NESC report with a dedicated and strategic all-island focus. I want to thank the Council members and the NESC Secretariat team for their extensive research and engagement over the last year to bring forward this comprehensive report to Government. Importantly, NESC is able to bring its respected, consultative and deliberative method to this work, and an approach that respects fully the principles of the Good Friday Agreement. The Council's recommendations will be positively considered by the Government across all departments. We will consult and seek to take forward agreed recommendations with our partners in the Northern Ireland Executive and United Kingdom Government. And we will work also with local authorities and civil society to make such significant and positive contributions to the shared island. Last October, under the revised National Development Plan, the Government affirmed an unprecedented total all-island investment commitment of more than €3.5 billion, including at least €1 billion to our Shared Island Fund out to 2030. And we set out new investment priorities across virtually all sectors to deploy this funding. Our goal is to work through all-island partnerships to invest for a far more connected, sustainable and prosperous island for all. We are working intensively now on a whole-of-government basis to make it happen. My department's Shared Island Unit, based here in Dublin Castle, has a driving and coordinating role, working with all departments and agencies. Last year, the Government allocated €50 million from the Shared Island Fund to move forward with two landmark cross-border infrastructure commitments, the Ulster Canal and Narrowwater Bridge, that had been talked about for decades. These projects will link communities and act as a linchpin for sustainable tourism and recreation in our central and east border regions. The Government also commenced the first ever all-island strategic rail review in partnership with the Executive, which will be completed later this year. This will inform how we invest in sustainable rail, working with the Executive and supported through our Shared Island Fund. Last month, I and Minister Simon Harris announced over €37 million in funding in the first awards made by the Higher Education Authority under the Government's new North-South Research Programme, also resourced through the Shared Island Fund. We are funding researchers in universities from all corners of the island to work on exciting pioneering projects over the next 4 years, on cancer and vaccine research, enterprise and innovation, and biodiversity conservation, to mention just a few of the 62 successful projects. And less than a fortnight ago, as part of my visit to Derry, I announced a new €5 million shared island development funding scheme open to local authorities across the island. Local authorities want to work together on a cross-border basis, for instance, to create tourism trails, conserve heritage, protect biodiversity, and help meet regional skills needs. This new fund provides the seed capital to those local authorities to bring their proposals to the point where they can apply for more substantial support. My hope is that this new initiative will empower councils across the island to develop a pipeline of new cross-border capital projects that will deliver common regional development goals and our Shared Island National Development Plan objectives. Today's NESC report sets out the particular achievement and further ambition of the North West City region, of the two councils and other stakeholders to work seamlessly together across the border, to deliver social, economic and environmental improvements for the entire region. In Derry, I discussed with the North West Regional Development Group and the two councils how the government will continue to support their impressive work and objectives. Throughout this year, ministers across government will be announcing more new shared island projects, including for EV charging, community climate action, border region enterprise development, and all-island civil society partnerships. These are the kind of meaningful actions that will bring us closer together on this island in real terms in the years ahead. We also want to do significantly more with the Executive and the United Kingdom Government to enhance the shared island for all. Already, the Peace Plus programme, funded by the European Union, the United Kingdom Government, Irish Government and Northern Ireland Executive, will provide more than €1 billion over the next 7 years to support peace and prosperity on this island. We are seeking to complement this with new and more strategic and impactful dimensions to our North-South and East-West relationships. I've had good engagement with Prime Minister Boris Johnson and with political leaders in Northern Ireland on how we can do that as part of our shared island approach, by working and investing together on common goals, including on climate action and sustainable transport. And we want to move ahead this year with new all-island research hubs to bring industry, research agencies and institutions together to conduct world-leading R&D in areas of common priority for both jurisdictions, like cybersecurity, digital healthcare and precision medicine. By combining our capacities in these and other areas, we can go far beyond what either jurisdiction can achieve separately, enhancing the foreign direct investment offering and indigenous enterprise base of the whole island. The government is ready to significantly resource these hubs through Science Foundation Ireland and our Shared Island Fund, working with the Executive and the United Kingdom Government. These are some of the immediate priorities and prospects for our Shared Island initiative. Significant and demanding as this investment and cooperation programme is, it is by no means the limit of our ambition. As we map our future ambitions, today's NESC report will play an important role. The government wants to see a deepening of cooperation and societal connections on the island in all areas, because that is how we will better know and relate to each other across all the different communities that make up the diverse patchwork of identities and experiences that is this island in 2022. It is how we take forward the fundamental commitment of the Good Friday Agreement to strive in every practical way towards reconciliation. This isn't a regional concern, an option, or a nice to have. Reconciliation is of vital interest for us all on the island of Ireland. Continuing challenges in the peace process, including on Brexit and dealing with the legacy of the past, risk holding back the historic opportunity we have now to achieve deeper understanding, trust and harmony between communities on this island. This is a moment for amending and tending of relationships across communities, borders and political traditions. The horror and suffering that we see today in Ukraine, inflicted by Russia's barbaric war, is never far from our thoughts or actions at present. It's also a stark reminder of just how precious is peace on this island. We must sustain and consolidate it as a priceless inheritance for our children and grandchildren. In Washington last month, President Biden and I affirmed the unequivocal commitment of the United States and Ireland to the Good Friday Agreement and the promise of reconciliation it holds. I also announced a further €20 million commitment by the Irish government to the International Fund for Ireland for the next 4 years for its Connecting Communities strategy to support peace building on this island. And the government's own reconciliation fund has been doubled in recent years, administered by the Department of Foreign Affairs. As Taoiseach, my focus is on securing agreed resolutions to current challenges in the peace process and ensuring that we deliver a new positive agenda underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement, so that we cultivate deeper community and political relationships through partnerships that deliver tangible improvements for this island and all the people living on it. And that is why the Council's report today is so timely and significant. It makes a series of major recommendations on how we can do just that, to put reconciliation into practice by working together on the things that matter most for people across our shared island, like addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, supporting good jobs and tackling poverty. The Council's findings are grounded in evidence and informed by broad consultation with practitioners, policymakers, academics and experts from across the whole island. And the report takes full account of the principles, institutions and procedures of the Good Friday Agreement. The Council's 3 overarching conclusions warrant particular attention and reflection. There is very significant support, as Helen said, in practice for all island approaches on key challenges. Climate and biodiversity loss provide an urgent platform for cross-border action, and factors that enable cooperation include a shared agenda and collaborative projects, resourcing and political certainty and support. Political leaders, North and South and East-West, should take account of these findings. The government will be guided by them as we work to enhance the shared island for all. In my view, the broad-based support in civil society for all island approaches, which NESC have clearly identified, isn't sufficiently acknowledged in our politics. That support has also come through strongly in the government Shared Island Dialogue series, which has so far engaged over 1,300 civic leaders from across this island. People are more than ready to work together in common cause around shared concerns, North and South. What's more, they don't view identity in simplistic, zero-sum terms, as is too often portrayed in politics, particularly in Northern Ireland. As Patrick Keelty said in his memorable contribution to the Shared Island Forum in December, the vast majority of people, he said, in the North no longer look at things through a binary prism. People are getting on with their lives and each other. The politics of the peace process needs to catch up. Today's Council recommendations are most instructive on the opportunities to do that, by working more ambitiously together in our substantial common interests in Northern Ireland, North, South and East-West, underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. For instance, the Council has recommended more investment in the All-Island Energy Network to help both jurisdictions meet our common renewable electricity commitments and reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels. NESC has also called for special initiatives to tackle concentrations of poverty on this island. I believe both governments and the executive need to do far more here together, not least on improving education attainment rates, which is imperative in consolidating peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. And NESC has recommended a stronger basis for all-island cooperation on enterprise issues. This is an obvious gap that we should also bridge as we work North and South to enhance clustering, innovation and entrepreneurship, including of women and ethnic minorities. In total, the Council has made 25 specific recommendations. Taken together, they represent a prospectus of clear benefits to be gained for both jurisdictions on the island in environmental, social and economic terms. The opportunities are there. We need to grasp them. The government will consult and seek to build consensus with our partners so that we take up these evident gains for the people of this island. I know that today's event is also an important part of the process of consultation and deliberation for NESC. To hear the reactions, perspectives and suggestions from everyone attending this morning, in person and online. An all-island civic engagement will remain central to how the government proceeds through the Shared Island Dialogue series and other engagements this year. In closing, I want to acknowledge and welcome the level of ambition in the Council's recommendations for what can be achieved on our shared island. This is what we need at this time, to move beyond the issues confronting us on Brexit and the protocol, and turn our energies to working in positive, practical ways to build a better future through the Good Friday Agreement. In next month's Assembly election, the people of Northern Ireland will provide a new democratic mandate for the devolved power-sharing institutions. This is a consequential moment for political relationships in Northern Ireland. The progress achieved through the Good Friday Agreement over the last 24 years must be protected and built upon. The way forward is for all political leaders to live up to the commitments of the Good Friday Agreement, which are overwhelmingly supported by people across this island. To see all of the political institutions of the agreement working and delivering for people, to reaffirm partnership, equality and mutual respect as the basis of our political relationships, and to work with sustained ambition in our common interests for a shared future for all. Today's report by the National Economic and Social Council helps light the way on how we can do that. It will significantly inform how the government develops our Shared Island initiative in the years ahead. Finally, I want to acknowledge one other significant launch today for the peace process. The start this evening of Series 3 of the magnificent Derry Girls, written by Lisa McKee. Now, there's not much from earlier episodes that I can quote as Taoiseach without causing misunderstanding. But as brilliantly funny as it is, Derry Girls also tells a deeper story, a journey of friends, of a city and of a society to win peace, to cherish diversity, and to strive for a better future. A story that we know so well, and one that we will still need to write together on this island through the Good Friday Agreement. I believe we will. Thank you very much indeed.
Taoiseach, we have a few minutes for a few questions, so I'm going to get on with it. First one I want to ask you is, generally people are judged by results, especially in politics. So can you give me 3 practical measures that you think are likely to be achieved as a result of this report? Just 3 practical examples.
Well, the first one is, and probably more longer lasting, actually will be the dialogue series that has happened. New generation of people engaging on the island on a whole range of issues. The climate and biodiversity loss being one such dialogue series, which has resulted in the creation of an all-island climate and biodiversity network. Secondly, concrete investment in terms of projects. I've mentioned the Ulster Canal. That will happen. That will be fully completed through the Shared Island, the Narrow Water Bridge, but also the research. I was very pleased to be both in Queen's earlier, prior to the HE announcement of the awards, and to be in Magee campus of Ulster University last week in Derry. And I think Siobhan O'Neill, is contributing later. Just give it, of the 62 projects, she's working with computational experts, computer people, computer science people. So you have a marriage of mental health and computer science to develop apps for young people in terms of mental well-being. That's just one of 62 projects. The other one being a cancer one in terms of liquid biopsies. I'm not a medical expert. Liquid biopsies, basically diagnosing through blood and so on like that. Fascinating projects. These are going to be lasting legacies, practical legacies for the people living on this island. And thirdly, the greater regional approaches. I think the Northwest is probably the best example of how two councils, Derry Strabane, Donegal, have come together. They've left politics outside the door. I had a wonderful meeting with them last week, again, and I met with them last year. And they look at the region and say, how do we economically develop the region? And in McGee, for example, there were 3 students from the Republic studying in their postgraduate medical program. Now, what they wanted, by the way, was to be able to get clinical placements in the Republic, which they're not at the moment. So who's ever out there to make that happen should make it happen, including ourselves in government. And I also met an individual in Atnagelvin. Now, that happened from previous investment, but it illustrates the practicality of the regional focus. He was a person from Donegal who, I hope he doesn't mind, but he got a heart attack. But I met him the day after, having got his stents in Atnagelvin. He didn't have to travel 2.5 or 3 hours to Galway, which is kind of the framework we have. He went very quickly to Atnagelvin, and we have invested significantly, the Republic have, in terms of the Cancer Consortium. In other words, the regional focus makes sense on so many fronts, particularly in specialist areas. What I would like to see, and I've been a long-standing advocate for this, and I think NESC highlighted as well, but we need to work with the executive and the British government. We do need a very concentrated target focus on school completion and poverty and disadvantaged communities in the north. That didn't quite happen after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and that's something I would love to see ultimately as a legacy, because I've been working on that in the Republic for a long, long time in school completion. And nothing gives a young person a better opportunity to complete in school and progressing onwards.
I hear your interest in research and your interest in education coming out there in spades and glowing lights. You mentioned, I think the initial fund had 500 million committed to it. And then in the National Development Plan, that's over a longer period, it's $1 billion. How soft or how hard is that commitment of $1 billion, that it's not just a 5-year plan?
Hard.
Hard.
Yeah, this is deeply
rock
embedded.
Hard, rock
yes,
solid.
It's embedded into government now, led by the Taoiseach's office. So into the future, this is something that is there for the long haul.
This is a pet project of yours. You set it up in Taoiseach's department. You've been driving it since. You have the experience now of it taking its first steps, up and running. Do you think it should remain in the Taoiseach's department? Is that its natural home?
Yes. And I think it's a government-wide project and has government-wide sanction and approval. Of course, I have to stress that. All of my colleagues in government, 3 different parties, are very committed to this. It fulfills a programme for government commitment. I have had a long engagement in Northern Ireland over the years in different capacities, both as a TD and as a minister, and particularly in foreign affairs and more specific issues. So it's not a pet project. I wouldn't describe it as that. I think this is an essential agenda for us all on the island, and I passionately believe that. I always tell that story of the time I was in Coromila, and it's a bit like some of the episodes in Derry Girls, how we misunderstood each other, and there was 12 of us and 12 unionist politicians, 12 from the Republic, and Kenny would have been there. And the first night, by the way, the Quakers who were facilitating us didn't quite understand our needs. And it took the late David Irvine and then the Kenny to articulate our needs, which was, could we now please go to the pub, having done an early bit of networking. And we had to open up the bar owner who had been raided the previous evening and who was very kind of worried about this. But it was quite early in the night, don't get me wrong. But more focused was, over the weekend, like the myths we had about each other. So what it taught me was, basically, you need to keep engaging, you need to keep dialogue, you need to keep dispelling the myths and maybe sometimes the misinformation we have about each other, and we need to develop trust and harmony. I
was struck by your reference to it's time for the politics to catch up with what's happening on the ground. But politics, that's the reality we have at the moment. Can government departments talking to each other different organisations, different academics, different NGOs talking to each other. Can people actually get round it if the politicians are continuing to stay behind, or to really get revved up and move ahead and make genuine progress? Does it need first-class engagement by both political systems?
I think both governments, what has been at the anchor of the Good Friday Agreement and the entire peace process has been both governments, British government, the Irish government, working lockstep together, but also working with the parties in Northern Ireland. I think people shape politics ultimately. I detect over the last number of years, and we're in a border situation at the moment with the North, and I acknowledge that, there is a growing sort of middle ground. A lot of people, as Patrick Keelty said, they want to get on with it and just want to make life better. And I think that we should focus on that. I detect that's coming. I was again in Derry last week meeting women at the interface, both communities, with tremendous relationships they've developed, and making the point to me that before you tear down any walls or anything, we need to build up our community relationships before you do that. And they very articulately put that to me. So I believe the people will shape the politics ultimately.
On that,
and I think the fact that so many people have participated in the civic dialogue, and to be fair to the political spectrum across Northern Ireland, whilst I understand people might have certain concerns and reservations, there's been no showstoppers yet on this.
Shared Island, United Ireland, are they mutually exclusive concepts? Can they run in parallel, or must one come before the other?
Well, we've been very clear that the entire Shared Island initiative is without prejudice to the constitutional positions or perspectives that different parties or different traditions have in respect to the future of this island. And there are various mechanisms within the Good Friday Agreement. What it is essentially is to really realise the fullest potential that is within the Good Friday Agreement, which hasn't been realised yet. And it's about building relationships between communities and also then doing practical stuff, doing something basically other than talking all the time about it in terms of the issues that matter to people. And when you knock on doors anywhere on this island, invariably people will ask about health, they will ask about education. Younger generations, not just younger generation, will ask about the future of this climate. We have a wonderful opportunity on the climate and biodiversity loss to leave politics outside the door, because we all know it's not something that's governed by a political border or a jurisdictional border, but something that is of urgency in addressing. And I really want to see us in the Shared Island Fund allocating funding to biodiversity projects across the border, and making sure that we, as an island, can contribute or share to reducing emissions, but critically then protecting biodiversity.
A final question for you. I was struck by your reference to how Derry and Donegal are working so well together. There are a lot of other counties in that border region. I know there's a very able representative who looks after Louth and Meath and 3 of the local authorities north of the border. But are there the likes of Cavan and Leitrim and Monaghan and Fermanagh, and at times Louth and Down and Armagh, that are almost left behind by the best pupils in the class and the canniest pupils in Derry and Donegal?
Well, yeah, they're always canny anyway. I think, but actually, you mentioned Louth. Louth's very proactive, and but there's other networks in the Northwest. I have to stress that, and they're quite effective as well. The Northwest has been developing for quite a while, but the others are quite effective, and Louth have come through on the Narrow Water Bridge with its neighbour as well. So I believe, look, the Northwest is one that I think has been at this for quite a while. They have a structure and so forth. The other sector, there's collaboration in terms of other corridors as well, and you might see a later manifestation of that in terms of the rail strategy, for example, Dublin-Belfast corridor and so on. So I think the others are not too far behind.
But basically you're telling them today to get on with it.
Well, you see, the critical part, we've allocated €5 million, because to be fair to the councils, if you want to develop a project or conceive of a project and develop it, it does cost money. And even to get it to the stage where it's a viable project to apply for further larger scale funding, you do need resources to bring it to that stage. And the 5 million we announced recently is money that the councils can now apply for to say, look, together we want to develop this project on a cross-border basis. We want to take it to this stage, to tender stage or whatever, and proof of concept stage. So I think that will be a very important seed fund that will really act as a catalyst for the councils and the different corridors to get on to this and to move with perhaps greater capacity and speed.
And this NESC report, finally, it puts down deeper roots for the whole concept of the shared island.
It does, because I've always been struck that NESC historically has given deeper roots to how we as a society has evolved in the Republic. It's objective, it stands back, and it creates an overarching framework through which we now can fine-tune our interventions or our policies, projects and policy agenda.
Taoiseach, I'm conscious you have a lot of other work to do today. I know how important it was for you to be here for this event. And on behalf of your audience here and online, I'd like to thank you for participating and for your address.
Thank you very much indeed, Tommy. Thank you. Thank you, Helen.
Good seeing you. Okay. So that was a very interesting start. A lot of practical talk, a lot of pointers in what we've heard from the Taoiseach and indeed from Helen. And in the next 3 sessions, we're going to drill down into some of the details that are in this actual report. And hopefully you'll get a lot of information, a lot of pointers, and a lot of questions will be raised by what you hear. So I'm going to welcome onto our stage 3 of our experts who are going to, first of all, we're going to talk about the economic recommendations and the significance of them in this report. So our first session is going to be chaired by Larry O'Connell, who's Director of NESC. He joined the organisation as an economist in, was it 2007? So he has a long 15-year track record with it. And he's going to outline the main recommendations for cooperation in terms of the economy on the island. And afterwards, I'll ask our panellists, Dr. Owen McGuinness, Michael Darcy, and Pamela Arthurs for their take. Larry, over to you to kick us off with the main recommendations as you see them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. So just to say on the economy panel, I mean, in 1992, George Quigley introduced what was seen as a visionary concept of an island economy. And almost 30 years later, Michael Darcy, who's with us today, writing with Francis Rwan, said that what was a radical proposition had become an everyday business reality. And I think that echoes the theme that we've already heard this morning about the idea that in a sense, on the ground, the project is racing ahead of a shared island. And the NESC work sought to really consider how that piece of economic cooperation could be enhanced. And we did detailed background papers that my colleague Noel Cahill did on the economy and on the regional development perspective. And I think they provide a very valuable input into the discussion. And in my opening remarks, I just want to focus, I suppose, on the recommendations. And in a sense, I was trying to think about it in just very practical terms as to what is the report saying. And I think there are 3 things that it's saying around the economy. I think the first one that it's saying is that we need to grab this economy's scale potential that exists on a shared island. The second thing is that we need to grow the clustering potential that exists. And the third thing is that I really think we now need to go for it. So I'll just say a little bit about each of those. In terms of the report, I think what's really evident is there's a strong economic logic for the shared island. The powerful economic idea of economies of scale clearly exists. We see in the work on energy that the cooperation on energy has helped to bring down the cost of energy. It has helped to increase the security of energy. It's helped to bring more wind onto the grid. So it has real practical benefits. The report is arguing that the funding is now there. There's significant funding. We should look at how we can increase that through things like the Project Ireland Fund 2040, seeing if there's more can be done for Shared Island. the city and growth deals, looking at how more of that could be used to support shared island. So that's our first sort of key recommendation. We have a number on that how do we invest further to capture this economies of scale. The second thing is we can see real evidence of the clustering potential. And for the non-economists in the room, I mean, clustering is a simple idea. It's that if you've got firms who work in a close geographical area, to what extent can they complement each other? Similar skills, can they share things in terms of in the supply chain, in terms of how they work with customers? There's real potential for that across the border areas to cooperate and deepen those clusters. And again, particularly I'm speaking alongside one of the preeminent experts in it, Owen McGuinness's work has really looked at this. How do we develop clustering in areas like med tech, etc.? We've looked at there's challenges to maybe get it outside of the city areas, to get it in the cross-border regions, but that's where the potential is, develop those clusters in those sectors. And tourism is called out in the report as being one of the areas. And in terms of a policy recommendation, we're suggesting that on the Irish government side that the new National Clustering Policy Group should really look at this shared island dimension, and that's clear in our report. The third area in the report then is this idea that we just need to go for it. If you look at it, what we're arguing in the report is that we should put in place strategic working groups, particularly things like renewable energy now, to bring the parties together to look at the opportunities around solar, anaerobic digestion, etc. And the second element of the go for it piece is I think we really need to look at our enterprise agencies. There is a lot of collaboration at an operational level, but I think there is scope to look at a strategic level, how it's written into the mandates, to see how more cooperation could occur. So Tommy, they're the main recommendations. I think there's a slide going to come up behind us with the actual, some of the words around what the recommendations are.
I really appreciate you keeping to our strict timetable because that's going to give an opportunity for questions, both from here in the hall and from online. At the end of, say, 3 reactions from experts we have. Now, Owen, you're a senior economist at the Economic Policy Centre of the University of Ulster. You have a long track record researching all-island economic development. So can I ask you, what element of this report shines for you? What comes up when you look at it?
Pardon me. I think there was always a temptation to come here this morning, Tommy, to say, well, we've a bit of deja vu. We were here 15 years ago. The British Irish Intergovernmental Council was looking at this. We had a comprehensive study then. But I think if you look at this report today, it moves us significantly on from that. I think that's the one thing that shines for me is actually the significant shift that this report could, if the recommendations are implemented, could bring us. And where I'm saying there, it reflects some of the major transitions we've seen in the last 15 years. You have the material around kind of climate transition and the potential around renewables, not in the economy, but in the circular economy. There's the bioeconomy and other parts of the report. You also have, I think, a whole thing around the digitization transition and some of the issues that's causing. So you have material there around good jobs agenda, around remote working and the potential there. So there's a lot of kind of new things in it. And I think there's also material there that notes the ground we still have to cover. Larry's just mentioned clusters there. I couldn't agree more on that. I think also 2 other things I would draw attention to for people in the report. One, again, outside the economy chapter, is the role of social enterprise. I think there's great potential there for that to be pushed, to be recognised, to be pushed on, perhaps with kind of social value acts, that type of thing around how public procurement can assist that sector. And then the other piece, I think, around regional development and placemaking. I think that's a critical part of it. The Northwest has featured strongly here. You asked the Taoiseach that question. I think it's good to have the Northwest there. I think it's good, kind of a sense of a success story, of a good story there to tell. But I think it probably puts it up to the other border regions now, in a sense, and other corridors to try and get in on that game as well. So there's a bar being raised to be hit now, I think, or to be crossed, perhaps, rather than hit.
Thank you, Owen. Michael, is it 27 years since you wrote the Border Crossings, Developing Ireland's Island Economy? So no more than Owen, you can claim to be a pioneer around a lot of this work. So what are the main recommendations? It's what, 164, 166 pages. What are the main recommendations that strike you?
Yep, 1995, border crossings developing Ireland's island economy. As Noel said, a radical idea picking up on what Sir George Quigley was saying at the time. So number one, the economies of scale and proximity have been taken on board by all of you in this room and everyone who contributed to the process, even if you didn't realize what you were doing that, because it was about utilizing the place that is our island for combining to max out on the benefits, the mutual benefits for everybody on it. So the fact that that's endorsed, I think, is absolutely number one. Number two, you pick out a number of economic areas, and as you say, getting on with it. I mean, I'm here today to tell you that business is getting on with it. You have so much all-island business that's happening as a consequence of the application of those principles right across so many sectors. You have it in retail banking, you have it in manufacturing, you have it in energy in the single electricity market, which you'll hear about in a while from Mark, etc. So there's a lot happening to build on, so there's momentum there. I suppose the third thing is that one of the things we learned, and there's lots of veterans in this room, in fairness, as I look around, and it's not because there's so many grey hairs amongst us, North-South doesn't just happen. It has to be made to happen. And in a way, that's what this report is doing. I could say, perhaps to coin a phrase, it's arguably the best North-South report since when we were doing the research that led to the negotiations that delivered the Good Friday Agreement. And if I can just pick up on that and add one extra point, picking up on what the Taoiseach said, even though it's only 2 days since the 24th anniversary, next year it's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. That is a big deal, and we should all make a big deal of it. We should think about how we apply its structures, its principles, and its processes to that. And I think the report gives us an excellent starting point to do that, because it laid out the facts, the figures, the data, everything that you need to know. And there's a lot of new people, new energy coming into the space that's really important in order to pick up on that. And just again, an investment point, Tommy, just to put a little bit of a question mark over what the report is highlighting for the Taoiseach and the government. There's areas we are working on shared island, but there's areas like climate change, like the food island, like food security, like infrastructure, where the two departments and the two systems are not joined up. And business is making investment, for example, to deliver climate action. The Oireachtas and the Assembly have put legislative targets in place, but there's no joined up talk between the two systems about how that is going to be aligned in practice. So you have the risk that investments will be made on a not joined up basis in all these key areas that we've made so much progress. So I think there's a real challenge to us now in this room to do the stuff that needs to be done to implement and to put pressure on systems, both sides of the border, and agencies to do that joining up and to continue the progress that has been made since border crossings and having delivered an island economy.
Thank you, Michael. Pamela, Chief Executive of the East Border Region Limited. 6 counties, 6 organisations, 3 from each side of the border, formed in the mid-70s, which is some track record. So you have that buy-in from local authorities already, and you're working that. So what's your assessment, given your experience, what's your assessment of the recommendations?
Well, in the first instance, I welcome the recommendations, but also if you could give me the opportunity to say that there's a very effective Central Border Area Network, which is ICBAN. There's ourselves in East Border Region, 3 councils, north and south. You have the 2 councils of Newry, Morndown and Louth working very closely together in a memorandum of understanding. And just recently, the Dublin-Belfast Economic Corridor. So there's lots of formal networks there. The Northwest Group, and I compliment the Northwest, but the rest of us, as you said, the Taoiseach earlier, have been working very hard at cross-border cooperation. I think for cross-border cooperation between local authorities to work, it needs a buy-in of your elected members, it needs a buy-in of your officials from Chief Executive down and the key stakeholders in your region. But where you will be successful, very successful, is if you have the buy-in of governments, both governments. The Northwest is a perfect example of that. And I think that is what we need to do now. And both governments could take that on board, that is the way we realise the objectives of this report. There are challenges for the report. If you look at local authority, cross-border cooperation on the island, where does it happen? Along the border. How do you encourage the other local authorities to get involved? To date, it's been done because it makes sense. It started in the 70s because it makes sense. It still makes sense for some. But you need to have that carrot. The funding here is very important. We've had the Interreg and the PACE programmes to date. PACE Plus, as the Taoiseach says, going forward. Shared Island complementing that. But how does Shared Island encourage Cork County Council? How does it encourage, the areas in the northeast in Northern Ireland? There has to be a carrot, it has to make sense, and there has to be mutual benefit.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw the session open to the floor and to our online audience. So if anybody has a question they'd like to pose, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you, sir, here. Thank you. And you might identify the organisation you're working with, just for our audience at home as well as the audience in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. I'm Fianna Fáil Senator Niall Blinny from the Northwest. But my question isn't about the Northwest, it's more about those regions. Specifically, maybe a perfect example is the, I suppose, around the peace walls in Belfast. And the Taoiseach made reference to it earlier. The areas of significant deprivation that need that funding for housing, education, the different community initiatives that need to happen there. Do you feel there's further reports needed in relation to this, or what do you feel is required? And I suppose a perfect example of how that change happened before in this island was around Limerick. And Tommy, you remember those years when there was complete deprivation in Limerick and significant government finance was put in there for rehousing, for R&D, the funding of the Limerick University. What's the opinion of the panel on that?
That's a very good question. Larry, I'm going to ask you, and maybe you'll direct where the question might go.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I mean, the answer, I think, is yes. We do think that there's further work needed on those types of issues, and I think the Limerick is a good example. Northeast Inner City and here is another good example. But I think in the time we had, we didn't quite get to probe the issue that you're talking about. But the next steps in the project would be that we deepen the engagement, and as issues like that come up, we might see whether it's us or the Shared Island initiative. But I think we certainly agree with the premise that there is interesting things to be looked at. So.
It was interesting how Pamela was making that very point in her remarks about the need for wider engagement beyond border areas. Is it the view of all three of you that you need political buy-in to really make this dance?
Well, so in respect of local authority cooperation, you absolutely need political buy-in. And it's a process, it's an ongoing process. Cross-border cooperation isn't easy. You could have a situation where things are going extremely well. You then lose maybe a number of your elected members and as the elections, etc., and you're back to building capacity. So you have to continually build that capacity. You have to continually work on it. So for me, it's essential, but it's also the officials, the chief executives, the senior management teams in the local authorities also need to be bought in. And again, because we have that distinct difference in respect of what the local authorities actually do, north and south, we need our key stakeholders. So it's a process, and it's around collaboration, it's around partnership, it's around, as the Taoiseach said, talking to each other. And on many occasions, you can have a situation where miscommunication happens. So again, it's continually working at that. And that's where I see the groups in terms of the Northwest, ICBAN and ourselves come in, because as officers there, you're working for everybody. You're working cross-border, you're neutral, and I think that's essential as well.
I get it loud and clear. Did I see another question down here on my left-hand side? Thank you very much. And a third one down there afterwards. Thank you.
It's Tin Tanham, Trinity College Dublin. It's following on really from that question because, like Michael, and I think we know each other a little, I looked at this in the early 90s when it was very much a dominant theme, and political hardline ideology did hinder things. So while I know money is a big carrot, I'm just wondering, in terms of political buy-in, what are the factors which contribute to that for more hardline unionists particularly, and what factors might overcome it, given the tensions we're now observing and the challenges unionism faces?
Thank you. And I'll ask for the third question so that I can hand it to the panel. There was a question just down at the back. Thank you, sir. Your arm raised. Lovely.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you all. My name is Neil McCann. I was a member of the East Border Region Committee in the 1980s. You bring back memories. And it was really all quite moving with a lot of communication. And I'm currently moderator of a dialogue group in Belfast. But the question I want to ask is, in the celebration of the Belfast Agreement of 25 years next year, there are still some things, obviously, that are not working properly. And what I would like to ask, and this is the question, is it time that the compulsory power sharing provisions of the Northern Ireland Act would be reviewed? The compulsory power sharing was, of course, designed to protect the Catholic community, and I don't really buy the communities, at least I certainly don't buy it in terms of future vision. We have to acknowledge the realities. But now it is, in fact, being used as the protection of the remnants of a unionist hegemony to prevent the existence of the structures in the first place. So we run a risk.
I get the drift of your question, understand exactly what you're asking now. Let's try and get our panellists to respond to it, because our time is limited. Thank you very much. Interesting question. Who wants to answer the questions? Michael?
I think, number one, we have political buy-in. It's called the Good Friday Agreement. That's my point about the 25th anniversary. It must be made clear the totality of relationships now includes right across the spectrum, including economics too, and this may be controversial. We have so much more capacity now to tackle the issue than we did 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Actually, I would suggest it's not just money. Really, money is actually the minor factor. The money is there, especially in the private sector, also in the public sector, at an unprecedented level. It's actually about thinking about this carefully and reflecting on how we go about this in a managed and careful way. It's very interesting. We were in Washington, the IBEC Joint Business Council in Washington there in March, and America is really engaged with this, and it's really important that we have something to say to them about how we're going to take it forward.
Owen, I saw your finger raised there.
Yeah, I think, the 2 points are probably connected in some ways, really. I still believe that, if we are doing things that make common sense, that are they're shared challenges or common challenges, be them economic or some of the social policy challenges we'll see discussed later on, or the climate challenges, I think that it's not a way around people's identity issues, but it's a way of allowing people to do that in a sort of parallel. They can sort of park one thing and work on the other. That is how it has happened, before. But I wouldn't underestimate, Tommy, the other point I would make is that we have been in recent years, despite all of the kind of resilience of, a number of the kind of border networks, we've been at a low ebb in terms of cooperation, both politically, but I also think from both central governments, I think we've been at a bit of a low ebb there. I think that's where the Shared Island initiative gives us some fresh opportunity, to think about that. But I think that, the idea that cooperation's there and there's enthusiasm for it, that's correct. But I think we've been at a bit of, as I say, a little bit of a low ebb, and a couple of quick wins, a couple of successes, even a couple of things that are piloted out, so that they don't have to go through too much rigmarole to give people an opportunity. I think the local government initiative that the Taoiseach has announced is an interesting one, but I wonder, should the end, is it about having a pipeline of capital projects, or should it be more capacity building there at a local level that actually brings other parts of the island in to the peace, and maybe other parts of the north, as Pamela has mentioned? Does it have to be all about capital infrastructure? Could there be other things?
Larry, would you like to wrap for us?
To wrap up rather than wrap.
Yeah.
I could do that too.
I could do that too, yeah. But I think it's been a great conversation, Tommy, because, for us, part of the NESC report wanted to bring the evidence of where we saw concrete positive things, but also room for improvement, and where we can take the conversation further. And I think even this short discussion, some of that has come up around the investment and risks around that, around trying to think about engagement, as you say, further away from the border areas and things. So that's exactly what we hope this report over the next while will do, is to create that conversation. So thank you.
Just in relation to your question about the mandatory coalitions. I think that's likely to be something that will be reviewed after the elections. I think theorising about it at this stage, I don't think it's practical until the elections take place. And just before we break, I'd like to share with you an experience I had. It was the day of the Ireland-Scotland rugby match. We had a visitor to our home in Sligo, a woman in her 90s. She'd be from a DUP family. She was down in Sligo, crossed the porous border to get her cataracts done, using a scheme provided by Northern Ireland's Department of Health. That facility being bought in a private hospital south of the border. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. Just in the same way as the EU cross-border directive was most of the money being spent on it on the island was southern money going north. Buses going from Kerry and Cork, far from the border, to access cataracts and hip operations, etc., in Northern Ireland. Along came Brexit, and you think that EU scheme would be over. But a line of finance was found from our own government to continue with that activity. So I take that north-south and south-north traffic, I take that as a very interesting example of how sometimes the people in very practical ways are getting ahead of the politics and finding practical ways around it. And I think that's part of the real politic that's going on the island. And I find that's the kind of dynamic you were talking about 27, 30 years ago. And I think it's very, very encouraging.
Tommy, could I say one?
Surely.
Just at a local level, politicians from every political party have been working together on cross-border issues for many years. You know, as I said, it's not easy, but I just wanted to make that point locally, that despite what has been happening nationally, there is that desire to help their communities.
And for unionism, the material well-being of Ulster will triumph.
Very interesting thoughts. Would you like to have a cup of coffee or a comfort break and maybe come back in 15 minutes' time and we'll resume? We have 2 more panels and some interesting discussions ahead. Thank you very much. So welcome back, everybody, when we're going to have a further 2 sessions when we'll examine some of the main recommendations of the National Economic and Social Council report titled Shared Island, Shared Opportunity. With me is Dr. Jean Moore, the Social Policy Analyst with NESC. She's going to lead the discussions with our panellists, Shirley Clerkin, Professor Michael Morris, and Mark Foley. So, Jean, could you please share with us the main possibilities for cooperation on climate and biodiversity identified in the report? And I know you will be further energised by the references you heard to these issues from An Taoiseach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommy. And yes, it's wonderful to be here today and have a chance to talk to you about the climate biodiversity aspects of this work. Hopefully by now, one of the clear messages that's coming across from the Council's report is that now more than ever, climate change and biodiversity loss provide a clear and urgent platform for ambitious all-island action and collaboration. And the Council made a series of recommendations in order to give the urgency and scope momentum and to maximise the available opportunities. Firstly, the report recommends that both administrations place greater focus on the connected nature of the climate and biodiversity emergencies for the island of Ireland, and to reflect this in a programme of coordination and joint action, utilising, as we've heard importantly today already, the capacity of the institutions and bodies of the Good Friday Agreement to realise the tangible benefits of cooperation for this most urgent and common challenge for the shared island. The Council outlines this could include a shared and inspiring vision for integrated climate and biodiversity action across the island, and this could be developed through a joint statement of common purpose. Secondly, that this could be explored in relation to working across a number of sectors and communities to work collaboratively to really build some of that momentum. The second key area of recommendations is in relation to the shared challenges and opportunities. The Council recommends the establishment of a number of strategic working groups, and these could explore opportunities for future collaboration on all island climate and biodiversity concerns. These could, for example, deepen research, knowledge and expertise that's clearly present across the island, but also they could provide a really important framework for collaborative, forward-looking discussion and formulation of advice on shared opportunities in key areas. I'm just going to briefly run through these 5 key areas. Firstly, in relation to sustainable agriculture. Clearly, there are many similarities in relation to the greenhouse gas profiles of North and South in relation to agriculture and climate, for example. There's also similar focus on recent legislation and heightened ambition, and it's really appropriate and timely to look at ways of collaborating on this. And for example, drawing on positive examples such as farming for nature, solutions that underpin land management and land use policy, as well as looking at things like peatland restoration North and South, where there's tremendous focus and activity. Secondly, a real opportunity in relation to the circular and the bioeconomy. We know that due to economies of scale and competitiveness, that the circular economy is ripe for all-island development. And some of these areas, for example, could be to do with all-island producer responsibility initiatives, for example, for tyres, or all-island waste strategies, all-island approach to circular economy in relation to reuse and repair, many different examples, and I know we're going to hear more of those now. Collaborations on renewable energy. Again, it's been emphasized today what a tremendous opportunity we have now, the potential to explore renewable energy opportunities, both economic and environmental, in relation to onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, wave and tidal energy in future, and anaerobic digestion. And given the success story of the all-island single electricity market, this is really integrated single electricity market is really important to build on that innovation and cooperation. Fourthly, in relation to valuing networks for nature, we have a really positive initiative in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, which is a volunteer-led initiative that has grown in popularity north and south. Local authorities are drawing on it, community schools, households, and it's that kind of engagement collaboration that's really positive to build on. We could look at things like Wildlife Web, nature recovery networks to build on that. There are tremendous potential policy tools in natural capital and valuing nature where work is going on north and south that could really think about that. And lastly, Tommy, in relation to, I'll be brief, marine and coastal climate adaptation and impact, to focus how to strengthen cooperation and expand knowledge in relation to the marine and coastal impacts. This could do with all-island approaches to flood water management, coastal erosion, and the impacts of a rise in sea levels. And there's tremendous activity already going with the Marine Institute here. We can really build on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You fairly whipped through that. Lots of ideas there. Now, Shirley Clarkin, you're the Heritage Officer with the local authority in Monaghan, a county with a deserved reputation for seeing an opportunity in most challenges. So with that practical, pragmatic history, what strikes you about this report? What jumps out at you?
Yeah, I think in Monaghan we are very solutions orientated. You know, we've had to be over the years, and this report, I think, for me, it does actually highlight quite a lot of practical examples and ways that we can move forward. And it's very clear that we cannot solve the climate crisis, you know, without the help of nature. And likewise, nature has its own values, and we are obliged to restore nature in its own right. And there's a huge opportunity on this shared island, this one single biogeographic unit, the island and its seas, to restore nature and to work together. And I think working together, I think Pamela referred to this earlier on, that we have been working together a lot over the years, maybe 15 years on biodiversity across border. We developed the first cross-border, or in Europe, regional framework for biodiversity about 10 years ago. We've built on that since with a lot of practical projects. But we need to see more of that collaboration on a much wider scale. And that involves NGOs, it involves local universities, it involves the local authorities. But key in all of this are the landowners and the stakeholders. We cannot deliver anything without the farming community, without people who use bogs or who recreationally use places. We cannot deliver. And I think it's very fair to say that we do need to build on these peer networks that are emerging. And we need to look at where are the solutions emerging from. And you can see the Farming for Nature, the peer led by farmers, talking to each other and sharing information on how to still have a commercial enterprise, but deliver more benefits for the ecosystem services for biodiversity. That can be spread out right across the country. Likewise, the cooperation projects that are out there at the moment for 20,000 farmers that will deliver benefits for all the high nature value farmland to the sort of middle to the west of the Republic of Ireland. But that sort of project, which is incentivised, farmer-led, involving people at that very local community is what we need. And it is more difficult to work across jurisdictions. The legislation differs often, the designations differ. So there are a lot of complicated, there are much more complications than you would have in a singular project in Tipperary, for example. But it really is worth making that effort, and it has shared benefits for us all, because nature does support agriculture. We cannot have food security in the long term without a healthy environment. We cannot have social justice without a healthy environment. We cannot have socially equitable places without tackling climate at the very local level. So I think this report actually gives us a lot of opportunity to have this multi-stakeholder, this catalysing of action at a shared island level is really, really prioritised in this report, and I'm really glad to see that right across the linkages in landscape, for example, the connectivity that's mentioned. And even in the 3 objectives for the shared island investment, they are, a more connected island. That can mean also biodiversity, hedgerow corridors, wildlife corridors, a more sustainable Ireland. What are we talking about there? More nature everywhere, better biodiversity right across the whole island, looking at our coastal zones, coastal erosion, climate adaptation, and a more prosperous island. Embedding nature and investing in nature and climate now is a more healthy, more prosperous Ireland in the future. And we have to look at that. And I think the shared vision that's in here and that's mentioned in here that we should develop could be developed very quickly, and should, because it's the practical effort that we need. It's action on the ground that we need to deliver the shared island report. And I think if we see that in the next few years, this report will have been the success that it promises to be at this moment.
Thank you, Shirley. Professor Michael Morris, you're doing really important work in what's known as the Amber programme at Trinity College. Been watching you, absorbing the 2 previous contributions. You've studied this report. What do you take from it?
I think the nice thing about this report is it doesn't just frame the problem, it provides detail on 2 of the essential solutions. One of those solutions is renewable energy, because we know that will help climate change. The other thing that will really help is us really taking part in the circular economy approach to everything that we do. And people think about the circular economy in a way which is slightly wrong. They think about how we convert waste into wanted products. Actually, the circular economy isn't that concept at all. It's about avoiding waste in the first place. It's about how we make things that last longer. It's about us fixing them and repairing them. And I use an example for me. A couple of weeks ago, my telly broke. I found a repairman who was willing to look at it. He couldn't even take the back off it. So it ended up in a skip. So it's the right to repair. It's extending the length of time that we have things from, everything from construction to kitchens to mobile phones to computers. And how do we do that? But the challenge of that is immense, because it's a whole change of an economic model. For the last 250 years, our economics have been dominated by selling things, by mass production and mass consumption. So the change that we need is precipitous. It really is a paradigm shift. How are we going to keep our economy growing? How are we going to keep it sustainable? So it's all about companies changing business models. It's all about us finding the technologies to those solutions. And that's what this report frames. We can't do that individually. We need the whole of the island to contribute to those answers. We need the whole of the island's business people to change the models. And we need to invest in the small companies that are going to come up with those novel solutions across the island. So that's why I'm so passionate about that report, because it frames it as a solution process. And the first part of that, as the report recommends, is a panel to investigate how we prioritise and how we fund that type of work.
Thank you, Michael. Michael Foley, Chief Executive of Airgrid. It has an all-island presence, all-island ambitions. I know that at a stage in your past, you went on the record and you said you're very committed to this notion of making a difference in your own lifetime and your own work. What do you take from this report in the responsibilities you have in Airgrid and how you can actually make the difference in the remaining years of your career?
It's Mark Foley.
Sorry,
No problem,
excuse me, Mark.
The sceptics will say another report, an aspiration. And I say absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Because 15 years ago, the Irish and the UK governments got together and they had a vision. And they had a vision for an all-island electricity market, an opportunity for collaboration post a Good Friday Agreement on a level never seen before. They put together a joint proposition which said we'll have 40% of all of our energy, our electricity, from renewable sources by 2020. The engineers, of which I'm one, thought this was mad, couldn't be done. And many of the skeptics says more ideology, more aspiration, never going to happen. And on the 31st of December 2020, across the island of Ireland, 43% of all electricity in that year came from renewable sources. It can be done. This is not about aspiration. This is about will. This is about ambition. This is about conviction. And as recently as this quarter of this year, the Northern Ireland Assembly has put in place an energy policy pretty well aligned with the Irish government in Ireland for an ambition of 80% of all of our electricity from renewable sources by 2030. Right up there with probably the top half dozen ambitions on the globe, in the globe. So that's the place we find ourselves in, and that is manifestly achievable with the type of collaboration and ecosystem that has been built across the island of Ireland in the last 15 to 20 years. We can do it if we have the conviction. Two things are incredibly important as part of that. We've got to bring the people with us. COVID has created no space for engagement around climate action. Hopefully COVID's abating and we can have the conversations with the people across the island of Ireland and get them engaged in what needs to be done. Because if the people don't come with us, we're going to fail. The technology isn't a problem. It's proven, it's there, it's waiting to be deployed. But if the people don't come with the infrastructure proposition, we'll fail. And secondly, and something very close to my heart, which is in this report, it talks about biodiversity. We can have an ambition if we build infrastructure, whether it's wind farms, whether it's transmission infrastructure, or whatever it is, to leave the environment better than it was when we arrived to do the project. And I think this report very, very elegantly and in a very ambitious way says, let's start having that conversation. It's a reasonable and I think proper ambition to put on the backs of developers. Leave it better than it was when you came in. Thank you very much.
Mark, it's really interesting that point you make. Where is the main obstacle? Is the political will there, and is it bringing the people with you, or is it a combination of people and politics?
Policy's there, the money is there. There's no shortage of capital to build projects. There are some issues maybe around planning, etc. But fundamentally, in my view, it's about winning hearts and minds. It's about getting the people across the island of Ireland to sign up to and understand why we have to do this stuff and what the benefits are for themselves, their children, and their grandchildren. If we don't act in this decade, we're going to fail, folks. So really, for me, it's not about technology. It's not about building. It's about people. And it's about getting people on our side, understanding why this must be done, and going forward with a common purpose.
I see Jean nodding furiously here. I'm going to ask for some questions from the floor. Any questions? Thank you. Just one here to start with. And maybe you might just let us know who you are, what organisation you're representing. That's for our audience at home as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's Karin Dubsky from Coastwatch and Trinity College. A wonderful event and panel. But I have quite a specific question. Climate change and biodiversity were mentioned by the Taoiseach and mentioned again. In the border area, we have the Loch Agency, but the Loch Agency does not have in its terms of reference the protection of biodiversity. It has in its reference to further aquaculture and particular species like salmon. But how can we genuinely protect biodiversity in the border area if we have a cross-border body which doesn't have terms of reference for it? So the question is, do you think by the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, we might have changed the terms of reference? And do we need it?
Thank you very much. Very specific question. Who'd like to answer it? Jane? Our lead?
I know Karen's commitment to biodiversity and marine issues, and I also know that this is an area that we mentioned in our work over the years. I think we're realising that we need to integrate climate and biodiversity across all areas of policy, and I think that goes for our statutory agencies, North and South. I think it goes for all of the institutions that are looking at cross-border work. I think in time, that ambition, certainly we've heard from the Taoiseach today about the importance of biodiversity. And I know in NESC, we're increasingly looking at how to integrate that with climate policy, to look at things like blue carbon, how do we sequester carbon through marine activity, to look at things like nature conservation while having renewable energy offshore. How do you bring these things all together? So I completely agree that biodiversity is perhaps more neglected in terms of the discussions we've had to date in policy, but I think it's increasingly catching up because it's so important, because we won't have the kinds of ecosystem services that we rely on for business, for agriculture, without that care and attention. So,
here's an online question that's come in. Should we be more ambitious in our targets for energy? The opportunity for offshore that would see Ireland as a net exporter of energy, and climate change reports require us to reach 100% of energy from renewable, not 80%. That's an online comment. Mark, would you like to take that?
Look, I appreciate the sentiment. The ambition in front of us is simply enormous. Nobody has ever done this. And I think we are going to be hugely... Can I separate this into two domains? Firstly, 2030. We have an incredible ambition for 2030, which is to get to 80% of all of our electricity from renewable sources. We are working, and we'll come out later in the year, with a study and an engagement process around what do we do with the natural resource that's off the coast of Ireland. And I fully accept the point. There is an abundance of natural resource there. And our commitment, working with the Office of the Minister, Minister Ryan, is to do a very engaging and detailed study about how does the island of Ireland harness that resource. And that's looking from 2030 right out to 2050 and beyond. So my commitment is we're going to do that work, and I think it opens up extraordinary opportunity for Ireland in terms of how do we deploy this resource, both for the economy, for society, and indeed possibly to support Europe. So we are committed to that, but first things first, let's get 2030 delivered. It's really, really important that all the organs of the state and all of the actors focus on delivery and that we achieve our 2030 ambition.
Okay, here's a really interesting question that's come in online. We know the role that a citizens' assembly has had in our recent history, the way it has been used to discuss change and I suppose accelerate change in some cases. There's not an equivalent movement or instrument in action up north, but there's a question here. Could panelists give their view on the creation of a citizens' assembly to discuss options and strategies for a new Ireland shared island? That as a mechanism. So can I just have quick reaction from some of you on that.
Well, I'll start and maybe Shirley will come in. We've just started, I believe, one on biodiversity, which is really exciting. Really looking forward to seeing what that comes up with. We've had in Ireland, we've had on climate, we've had a history of using citizen assemblies. And I think what's really interesting is the Taoiseach's Department, the Shared Island Initiative, has been doing dialogue series on a number of areas which have a strong feel of that kind of collaborative engagement. And I think the engagement part of our work, I mean, the consultation we did, the submissions we received, the extent of engagement from, you know, environmental NGOs to business communities, local authorities, heritage officers, it's that sense of all willing to roll up their sleeves and come into collaborative solutions. So I think at this moment, citizen assemblies are brilliant. They do take a lot of resources and planning to do them really well. So it's a matter of trying to decide what the particular focus would be. But I think they are a very valuable tool, and I think we will see more of them.
Michael, Shirley, Mark.
I'll make a start. I think one of the key things that we've got to think about is the economic changes that are coming, and they are coming because we're competitive as an island with the rest of Europe. And things are changing so dramatically in the way companies operate, in the way we live our lives, and how we look after the planet. The people need to come with us. The people need to understand that, because changing the way we do things isn't always about top down, it's about bottom up. And it's about people telling us, people embracing the changes that they'll need, you know, all the way from recycling properly, from cleaning things before you go into the bins, for telling companies that the products that they do isn't big enough, going to the supermarket and saying, I just want to refill up my packages of Lenore. We have to embrace that. That transition is going to be so difficult for us to do, right? We can't underestimate the challenge. And that transition needs to be fair and equitable to everybody. But it should present opportunities. It should present opportunities in terms of spreading jobs, looking at rural economies to contribute to that. So we absolutely need a citizens' assembly, because they are the people that are going to take those changes on board, and they have to understand them and embrace them.
Shirley?
Yeah, well, at the moment, there's a citizens' assembly that has just started on biodiversity, and I think that's a really positive initiative. And there's also going to be a young person's assembly also dealing with...
Are these 26 county assemblies?
They are. But I was just to build on that, I was going to say that I think the recommendation that's in the report in and around developing an all-island vision for biodiversity and climate change is a really positive thing, and can be done in this way with the dialogues that we have been having, which I have found extremely enriching and positive, and actually has given me energy to continue in this work, which is quite difficult and can be quite draining when you've been in the environmental field since the mid-90s and you've gone through lots of government departments and, you know, policies, and still the environmental indicators are going down instead of rising despite the policy. So I think that this all-island vision just allows people to buy in with their hearts and minds, and you really need that. And then, you know, to see where the solutions are emerging from. So that's what I'm talking about. These solutions are emerging from the farming peer networks. They're emerging through NGOs. And they're also emerging at local authority level. And I know they're not always given much credit, but there are a lot of solutions coming through local authorities with communities and stakeholders and other collaborators, working with universities in a very practical way. And I personally would like to see more of that, and to try and get these win-win-win solutions that protect biodiversity, absorb carbon, you know, restore our degraded carbon sinks or peatlands, and also try to get renewables on stream quicker. And I think we can do that, but we need to do it as an all-shared island. There's a lot of benefits.
Mark, you know, you were talking about bringing the people with you. Do you see that consultation function of local meetings, parish halls, working your way up? Do you see that as a way of doing it? That citizens' assembly model was used sometimes to bypass, I suppose, political uncertainty or at times political reluctance to sort of move things on. So do you think it could have a role in what you're talking about?
I think absolutely. The profound, and they are profound changes that have happened in the last 10 years in the Republic of Ireland around social legislation, were unimaginable 20 years ago. They were led by people, not by politicians. And some of the narrative today, coming across very strongly, is around the failure of political leadership and the voice of the people leading the politicians. I think when it comes to collaboration and in terms of the shared island proposition, we've got to get the voice of the people. And the Citizens' Assembly, my goodness, has served us incredibly well in the last decade. And I think it is something we have to further leverage, because it doesn't appear it's going to come from the politicians. And I think the people are very sophisticated when you put them in a room. We've seen it work. And I would be very much in favour of it. Our Shaping Our Electricity Future, which was the biggest consultation by any state company, which was published in October of last year, November, at COP26, we did Citizens' Assembly. We asked people what they wanted to see in the power system in 2030, and we listened to them. And I think it is definitely the way forward.
Wow. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to wrap, because you're our lead. So would you mind doing that?
Oh, well, listen, I'm hearing so much about engagement, and it's an area NESC has been really interested in, wind energy and community engagement for years now. And it's this sort of collaborative sense that I'm getting, this problem-solving ability, but also making visible the links that are already there among businesses who are just getting on with it, as we've heard this morning, about environmental NGOs who are looking at the risks of environmental divergence, policy divergence, and looking at problem-solving in anticipation of that, and looking at ways of just making those links to do with pollinator plans, etc. We're hearing a lot about integrated solutions with climate and biodiversity, and really the importance of doing that. Most importantly, it's around drawing on the expertise, the knowledge, the research, the support from communities, the All-Ireland, Integrated Research Network, Biodiversity Network. There's many, many examples which aren't visible, but we can draw on and build on. And I think the tremendous potential for energy is what I'm hearing, renewable energy. And I know communities are really positive about that. We've got auctions now in the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme that communities are lining up and wanting to be part of. So this future we have is bright if we can get people engaged.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring our second session to a close. Time flew when you're having fun. And I have to say as well that it was lovely to be surprised by something that came from left field, that came from the online question, and how energised you all got by the idea of more consultation, that Citizens' Assembly model, that all-island version of it, that maybe the hybrid that could be developed. I think it was one of the interesting takes from today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you.
We're going to move on to our third and final group shortly. I was talking to Helen about it this morning, and I was saying this is where it gets kind of tough, because this is the last session, and I remembered the old newspaper formula of the inverted pyramid, and the stuff at the very end, if you were editing, the stuff at the very end could be dumped. So as we're coming towards the end, the attention span begins to drift. So this is a hard session for people to actually take part in and to deliver. But because it's Helen and because of the quality of our guests, I know it's going to be an interesting session. And hopefully we'll get some surprises in it too. So as you know, this is Dr. Helen Johnston, the actual author of the report, and she's going to present her summary on the main recommendations on social policy and well-being for the island. And afterwards, we'll seek the views of Owen Reedy. Professor Siobhan O'Neill, I think, is going to appear online. Hello, Siobhan. Nice to see you, to have you muted there, but you can give us a wave. Mental health champion, and a lot more. And our final contribution is going to be Breed O'Brien. So, Helen, can you kick off with your thoughts, please, on the main recommendations? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. I'm glad to see you're all still with us. So I'm just going to outline the social policy recommendations. And on social policy, we examined all-island cooperation in relation to poverty, mental health, and social enterprise. And then NESC has also been involved in work on well-being, and we also included that in the report. And right across the work that we did, an issue that came up was the need to have comparable data. So we've recommendations on data improvements on an all-island basis as well. So then just to look at social policy, we recommended that for ministers and departments, it would be useful to jointly have engagement with stakeholders, and we just heard about that in the last session in relevant sectors, to hear their views and expectations of what North-South cooperation needs to deliver, and then that could lead to the development and updating of work programmes. The Department of Social Protection here and the Department for Communities in Northern Ireland run an annual social welfare summer school, and we think that's a good way to engage on different ideas, and that could be done with other departments as well. The forthcoming Peace Plus programme, which we've heard about today, that's also an important opportunity to affirm the benefits of cross-border cooperation on a range of common social policy concerns. We heard the Taoiseach refer to need to tackle poverty, and there are special initiatives both in the south and the north on tackling poverty, and we think we should share those experiences, and that's something that could be considered at the annual Social Welfare Summer School. And we have Breed O'Brien from the Irish National Organisation of the Unemployed here today, who can talk to us about poverty and unemployment. We also heard this morning about the successful experience of providing specialist services on an all-island basis. And we have Professor Siobhan O'Neill, the Northern Ireland Mental Health Champion, to provide us with that perspective on mental health issues and the potential for collaboration across the island. We also looked at social enterprise, and both administrations and social enterprise organisations can build on the platform that we already have for greater recognition and development of collaborative efforts. And then on further and higher education, the government, working with the Northern Ireland Executive and the UK government, could encourage more cooperation in further and higher education and training institutions. And our panellist, Owen Reedy from the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, is well placed to comment on some of these recommendations. Then in relation to developing well-being, we recommend that there's scope to develop cooperation on the shared interest around developing well-being measures of progress, which move beyond just the narrow GDP assessments that we've been used to. And then we can use those well-being frameworks as a tool for engagement with a wide range of different people right across the island to learn from each other. And then finally, in relation to data coordination, both administrations, and we've talked to the statisticians in both administrations, and there is a need to focus on more comparable data, especially for the sectors that we looked at. It came through in relation to the environment, on health, on poverty, on education, and trade and well-being. So I just look forward to what our panellists have to say on those issues.
Thank you very much, Helen. Owen, Assistant General Secretary with ICTU. So you have lots of on-the-ground practical experience on the island. Is there a standout section in this report for you? Are there ideas that really grab you?
Yeah, there are, Tommy. I mean, this is a series of reports that NESC have done. We're really impressed with the Good Jobs report of last year, and I think this one adds to that. There are two things that jump out to me in the recommendations. The first one is the whole issue of joint ministerial and joint department engagement with stakeholders, and the second one is the issue of a well-being index. And I think it's no surprise that I would look at that from the perspective of the world of work as a trade unionist. When you think of the challenges that people, not just on the island, but across these islands and beyond, have been through in the last 2 years, we've a real opportunity to recast how we look at work, how we value work, and crucially, how we value workers. And I think there are some real important issues there. But I think we also need to be honest about the potential for some of this unless we get over the log jams, because, as you know only too well, we have some serious challenges in Northern Ireland, lack of political stability, a third of the last 24 years, no government, 60% of the last mandate, no government, and whether we'll have one after the 5th of May remains to be seen. This puts it in context. There's no organisation like NESC in Northern Ireland. There's no social dialogue in Northern Ireland. I was listening to the previous debate where they were talking about a citizens' assembly for Northern Ireland. What needs to happen at the start is the executive needs to engage with the social partners. There's very little engagement there. In this state, after social partnership, the government still saw the value of engaging with employers and unions and others, and we have it today with the labour-employer economic engagement process. So I think there's much to do. On the wellness issue, again, I think when you look at jobs, good quality jobs, that's a crucial issue. Northern Ireland has some way to go, and I think we need to look at the concept of fair work and decent work. Wales and Scotland have pointed the way in which an executive can address those matters. But I think crucially, there are a couple of opportunities, and we should go back to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The first one is there should be support for social dialogue in Northern Ireland, but then the Joint Ministerial Council should alongside meet with the trade union movement, employers, and civic society as well. And we should also do that east-west, because essentially they are the three strands, 1, 2, and 3, with internal in Northern Ireland, north-south and east-west. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. I think the second thing that needs to happen on wellness is we need to look at how we categorise it and how we value it. And I think the Carnegie Trust have a really good job measurement indicator. It was developed through trade unions and employers and the state working together, agreeing some fundamentals. And it looks at wellness in the workplace, psychological as well as health and safety and a range of other matters. And I think if we can do that, we can improve the situation and we can take much from this report to go further. And the last thing I'd say, Tommy, is there's a directive coming out, hopefully this June, the Adequate Minimum Wages Directive, which tragically Northern Ireland no longer being in the EU won't transpose. But the fact that employment rights is a devolved matter in Northern Ireland, there's nothing stopping a progressive, reforming, forward-looking executive saying, we do not want workers in Northern Ireland to fall behind the rest of Europe. We will do something similar here as well. So I think there's a lot in the report, and I think, you know, if we had a NESC in Northern Ireland or something like that, we'd be in a better place.
Yeah, we might come back to that later on, because I'm struck by how the political system here sees NESC and sees social dialogue as an aid, something to deepen engagement, where I don't know whether it's a reluctance in Northern Ireland because it feels threatened by it or it doesn't understand the potential of it. But there's a difference there in attitude, certainly. Siobhan, hello, up there.
Hello.
Your praises were being sung earlier on. I understand you had some visitors maybe from the Shared Island Unit or from the Taoiseach's department in Derry in recent times. You're Professor of Mental Health Sciences at the University of Ulster. You've read this report. I'd say your views were taken into account when it was being drawn up. So what do you take from it?
Okay, so I really welcome the report. I've already been doing a lot of the engagement, meeting Minister Butler regularly, actually, since I became mental health champion here, and talking about how we can maximise the impact of what our regions are doing in terms of mental health and wellbeing specifically. So I would point to the fact, and the report says this, that we have mental health strategies. They're both fairly recently developed, and they are very, very similar. And whilst the context may be a bit different in Northern Ireland, and ours is a Department of Health strategy, there's so much in there that actually they're actually the same across the two jurisdictions, and the ethos and the direction of the two strategies is very, very similar. So what I would be proposing is certainly that we would be looking to maximise the impact of everything that we're doing in relation to mental health, so that people on both sides of the border benefit. I can see areas in relation to primary prevention, and this is not really in the report, but of course the two regions have similar risk factors. So we need to be looking at what the attitudes are in both areas to mental health and illness. Mental illness and suicide prevention is another one. And then looking across our shared digital and traditional social media channels, all of that, to think about how we can do those cross-border campaigns to raise awareness, to remove stigma. And then there's lots we can be doing in the early intervention and prevention services. So that's one side of it. And then, of course, we have a lot of treatments that we're delivering, and there are gaps in the services. And of course, if we work together, we could ensure then that most people across the island have good access to mental health services. So things like social prescribing already happens. It's funded by COT. The Peace 4 monies are being used to develop resilience programs across both sides of at the border, and I'm involved in a study there. I think we could do more work around eating disorders, perinatal mental health, essentially giving people a choice of providers, allowing people to receive care close to their home, close to their family, and we know that's what works. And it's in keeping with the whole idea of trauma-informed practice as well, where people have that choice and they can go to a service that suits them and meets their needs. So lots more collaboration that we can do, but there's already quite a bit happening, I think, in this whole area. And of course, the Peace Plus monies offer opportunities, and there's a mental health strand in there that we might want to use and think about how we develop that across the border.
Thanks, Siobhan. Stay with us because we'll include you in the question and answer session shortly. Reid O'Brien, Head of Policy and Media at the Irish National Organisation of the Unemployed, based here in Richmond Street in Dublin. I was struck by a number of comments in previous sessions where people were talking about broadening out the border area involvement, widening the involvement of communities deeper into the south, further into the north. What do you, in your role, what do you take from this report?
Okay. Well, I suppose just to say, we have members in our organisation, affiliated organisations who are based in the north, and there's always a place on our National Executive Committee for an organisation from Northern Ireland. And we very much value that engagement and working with our colleagues in the north. A number of things struck me about the report. One was just, naming the need for strategies to reduce poverty, engagement on shared experiences. Now, in the report, it talks about that happening maybe between the officials, but then in the well-being piece, it talks about the importance of building on the lived experience, that progress is capturing that, and the need then to really engage with people, to work with people, so that people are very much involved in naming the issues that are facing them and their families and their communities, and play an active and leading role in the resolution of those challenges. So there are a number of things then we need to do to move forward, not necessarily in the report, but issues of great concern to organisations like ourselves. One is the whole issue of income adequacy and addressing that, and that is an issue right across this island. A lot of people struggle to make ends meet, and in the current climate, the way things have evolved from a range of reasons, that challenge has become even bigger. And then likewise, over the past number of decades across the island, local community-based organisations trying to work together, work collectively on issues, a lot of the resources for that type of work were reduced. And they really need to be reinstated. If those communities right across the island are to play an active part in the development of a shared island, of an equitable, sustainable and inclusive shared island, then they need to be provided with the resources to be able to do that. I was struck by how in a number of the other panels, people talked about no shortage of money. Well, in a lot of community development work, there is a shortage of resources. And a number of people recently, just around a number of conversations, just raised that challenge of trying to manage work, trying to develop work on a shoestring, and a shoestring that's been getting thinner and thinner. So that's a real issue around how we properly resource, work on the ground, work for organisations working on social and economic inclusion, working for real justice, not just social justice, but economic justice as well. And I think that's another piece of work that was done through this process that was really helpful, was just that looking at that whole area of good jobs. People often say a route out of poverty is employment. That's only true if it's a good job that people can access. So people then need the supports to be able to access that good job. The world of work is changing very dramatically. A lot of people find the skills that they have, the experience that they have, may no longer be what's required for the jobs of even now, let alone tomorrow. So we really need to ensure that we're supporting people both individually and at a communal level to be able to adapt to the changes that are coming to us, and so that people see real progress in their own lives and that of their families and have real hope for the future. Just there's one thing that really struck me about in the Department of An Taoiseach's vision for well-being work that they're doing at the moment. enabling all our people to live fulfilled lives now and into the future. I think that's a really nice motto for just the development of the work on a shared island. Thank you.
Thank you. I met Catherine Donoghue during the break. She runs the treatment abroad unit in Kilkenny for the HSE, and we were talking about the numbers of people going north and elsewhere. But the Taoiseach was saying that when he was in Derry recently, that he was meeting people who are accessing mental health services on both sides of the border. Siobhan, is that happening a lot, or is it very, very basic? What are the numbers like? People accessing treatment and both, you know, being able to travel across the border for treatment in mental health issues.
It's hard to get the numbers because there's so many different providers of mental health services, and one of the things we're going to do with our mental health strategy is develop a single regional mental health service that includes the community and voluntary sector. So it's really difficult to get the numbers of people who are going to those community and voluntary groups for mental health services. And of course, in both jurisdictions, a lot of people end up paying privately for mental health services. So again, we wouldn't have the numbers, but it's certainly significant, and it's something that, you know, and even in terms of the quality of services and what people are getting and how much they're paying and all of that would need to be considered. But the work that we're doing in schools is happening in schools on both sides of the border. And again, it's huge numbers there. You know, we're talking tens of thousands of interventions delivered as part of those programs. So there's a lot of the early intervention and prevention work, and a recovery college is a cross-border recovery college too. So when you add it all up, this is going to be substantial.
Fascinating. Questions? Gentleman here in the front. Thank you very much. Microphone coming, and you'll just identify, sir, the organisation you're representing. Thank you. Just here. Thank you.
Gormagat, John McGuane from the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, and congratulations to everybody on the Shared Island team and NESC on the production of today's report, and indeed on the Shared Island project to date. I suspect, not to kind of unsettle the apple cart a tiny bit, that we're all in violent agreement on the merits and indeed the successes already of this really important project. I mean, from an all-island perspective, regardless of anybody's persuasion, the birds don't know where the border is, the wind doesn't know, the fish doesn't know, and the electrons don't know. So, of course, we should be, you know, holding hands in every possible way, not to be in any way, you know, flippant about that. The challenge that we're seeing very currently, and I wonder about from the point of view of the Shared Island project and what it sets out to achieve, is a question, and this is the social module, so I'm choosing to address this one, is how do we make sure that the other fact of life in our shared space these days is what's broadly been called identity politics, and that while we're all in violent agreement on the necessities of day-to-day life, I mean, you know, people want more than just the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, but they want to feel part of a shared community where everybody's identity is respected. And not to be obtuse, I mean, there's this problem now, very currently, in election season, but maybe deeper, that is seeing the identity of the, what you might broadly call mainstream moderate unionism, not sure about where the projects are going if we don't make sure that their identity is respected. So I'd appreciate some thoughts from the panel on that. Thanks.
I'm going to ask you to lead off on that, Helen. I'm going to ask you to answer it too, Owen.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. There's two elements to it that I want to talk a little bit about. One is the constitutional issue, which is really important in terms of identity, and that's something that we didn't look at, and we deliberately didn't do that because I think it's quite contentious. The other area is just to look at what is already happening and why it's happening and how it's happening and how that can be of benefit to the population on the whole island and how we can work together. And that's what I think this report has uncovered some examples of that. And I'd also say that particularly in Northern Ireland, and we did talk to people right across the community, not at a political level, but right across the community, that the identity is, is divided in two by and large, but in reality, we have a much more mixed community, certainly in Southern Ireland, but also in Northern Ireland, which sometimes I think isn't recognised at all. We have people of different nationalities living there, and it's sometimes quite difficult for them, and we can read on the news about various things that have happened there. So I do think we need to look beyond. Identity is obviously important for individuals, but in terms of delivering economic, social and environmental benefits, we need to respect the identity but move beyond that to try and collaborate for the benefits of us and our families and our future generations. So
thank you. Owen?
I think it's a great question, John. It's really, really important. And I'd answer it in two ways. As you know, that the trade union movement on the island of Ireland is we don't see a border, but we're very neutral on the constitutional issue, because our view is people have multiple identities. Identity is not a linear thing, it's multifaceted. And we're very proud of the fact that we're an all-island body, that we're the largest civic society body in Northern Ireland, representing people from the two traditional communities. But as Helen says, the people who consider themselves others and the growing international community. And I think that diversity and that plurality is a source of strength as opposed to weakness. And I think in many ways the trade union movement have been practicing the shared island concept for decades. But the second thing is, and it goes back to the point Tommy touched on after my contribution, the social dialogue piece in Northern Ireland. Politicians represent people horizontally. I think employers, trade unions, farmers, the community and voluntary sector represent people vertically. And in many ways, one of the reasons why I think the political project in Northern Ireland is stilted, notwithstanding the fact that you have 5 parties, involuntary coalitions, some who don't even share power with each other, some who would rather the state didn't exist. But the fact that you don't have that social dialogue supporting and underpinning politics is a problem. And I think if we had that, the issue of identity and the issue of fear of people's identity not being respected, it would still be there. I'm not going to be naive to suggest it would disappear. You only have to drive around Northern Ireland in the various villages and you know exactly where you are when you see the posters, which is quite tragic. But I think if we had more social dialogue and politics was seen as a more fulsome, participative engagement, I think those threats that people feel would dissipate to some degree.
I see an online question here. Has the report recommendations how inequality as experienced by individuals with disability can be addressed? Hello, up there in Northern Ireland.
Hello.
Have you a view on that? And Breed, you might have a view on it as well.
Okay, well, I was going to take the other question as well, and just to comment that if we apply some of the principles of trauma-informed practice to this and recognise that people in the north particularly are coming to this with a particular type of history, and that there are real triggers and real fears there, and talk about them and open up that conversation about identity politics and examine what the threat might be perceived as and where that comes from, just discuss it more openly. I think that would be helpful. The question was about people with disabilities, and I think in terms of mental health, there's a group of people with very severe mental illnesses that need treatment and they need a particular type of care, and we could work much better across the two regions in relation to how we serve those people. And then people with very specific low frequency mental health problems who need specialist help. Again, there's that need for a service that's local, and currently in Northern Ireland, a lot of people who need long-term care end up going across the water to centres in England, and that's not satisfactory from our perspective. So there's a lot to be gained in all of those areas in terms of how we do things in the north here.
One question that I suppose as one add-on to that is, are we better or worse south of the border in how we deal with disability issues? Or is there a difference in standards? Owen, you'd have a perspective on that too. Breed?
I was going to add that one, Joe. In terms of, I suppose, the report looked at quite specific, it looked at, I suppose, the broader picture and then a number of quite specific issues. So in terms of disability overall, no, but in terms of mental health and the link between poverty and mental health, it goes into that. But I do think in terms of looking at strategies around reducing poverty, then the issue of disability would have to be included in that conversation, because the reality is that an awful lot of people who have disabilities are also struggling to make ends meet, and poverty is often a part of their reality. So I think that's why then it is so important that we ensure that there is active engagement of people for whom the issue under discussion is their lived experience, and that they and the organisations that work on those issues are properly supported to engage in them and to ensure that the work that is done will be inclusive of everybody. So in terms of identity, yes, on this island, for many decades, that particular issue has meant one particular thing. But there are other communities as well, and another community whose exclusion is even more stark than people who have disabilities, and that's the traveller community, who again would view the island as one island and often would view the two islands as one entity. And so we need to ensure that if we are developing a shared island and we're striving for it to be inclusive and equitable, that we are indeed ensuring that what is the work that's done will address the issues facing people with disabilities, will address the issues facing communities who have been and are as excluded as travellers are. So that we need to make sure that there's equality is at the heart of, and human rights at the heart of the work as we move forward.
On that disability issue?
To be honest, Tommy, I have no expertise in that area, so I have nothing to add.
Okay, Helen?
Yeah, just to kind of re-echo what Breed said, that we didn't specifically look at disability per se, but whenever we looked at poverty issues, people with disabilities have a high risk of poverty. They have difficulty accessing jobs, and there are issues then within the social welfare systems of both the North and the South in relation to how they support people and families with disability. So I think it is something that A, needs to be addressed, and B, that we can learn from each other in terms of what works.
Thank you very much. That brings our session to an end. I have a timekeeper here telling me that I have to call a halt, because I'd like to ask Larry to come and maybe give us an overview of, say, the event that has taken place. So if you'd like to come to the actual podium itself, Larry. You'll stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Yeah, I just wanted maybe two comments. One is just kind of what some of the key messages I heard today, and then a very brief comment about what NESC will do next. I think there were three big messages that I would take away. I think the first was that the cooperation that we're talking about, cross-border cooperation, it really does solve problems for us. And I think that particularly came across when we heard again from Mark about the account of what's happened on energy. So I think that gives us great confidence. I think when we dig into that a little bit, I think the two big things to deliver that were, and this came out in Mark's account, but also in others, it depends on vision. We need to have a vision, an ambitious vision for what we can achieve in terms of cross-border cooperation. But the second part that really came across was, in order to achieve that ambitious vision, it really depends on empowering and incentivizing experts, networks, communities, farmers. I think it was Breed made the point, what we're talking about is engagement not just across officials, it's across a whole spectrum of interests. So I think that idea that the cooperation can solve problems is a real strong takeaway from it for us. And that sense that what it is it's a conversation, and it's a conversation about energy, biodiversity, poverty, good jobs. These are the themes that we need to look at and see how we can go forward. The second theme for me then was that, well, people really want to get on with it, and in fact they are. And we heard that from Michael earlier in the morning about business, but we heard it right through, we heard it again from Siobhan in terms of mental health. People are looking at how to forge ahead with cooperation. But I think, and again, an important message in that was, with that cooperation takes time. There are sensitivities, there are political sensitivities, there's personal sensitivities that need to be grappled with. And also, I think Shirley made the point, that cooperation across border, it's also complex, but it's worth it in the end. So I think that sort of theme is really important. And the third theme was that I think that cooperation that people want to get on with, government, we heard today, really want to deepen it. They want to take it forward. There's real commitment to the investment piece on it, but also to the research piece. and also to this idea of trying to deepen the engagement geographically, away from the border. And I think there was a real commitment, and we heard it from the Taoiseach this morning, to take forward the discussions at all political levels, and I think that's really critical. So those for me are the three big themes. In terms of what NESC will do next, I think this was, we had an idea when we were finalising the report that it would generate a conversation, so I think that's been really evident today. So our next steps is to try to take that forward through various processes, but obviously one of them will be to engage and with the government and with the Joint Secretariat of the North-South Ministerial Council as they reflect on the report and see what ways NESC can further do further work in this space. But I would also like, with the report as it is, to have more conversations, workshops on maybe certain themes within it or the overall report, particularly to try to make an explicit effort to do that north of the border. So there are our next steps. I think I just hand back to Tommy.
Lovely. I'd just like to thank you for being such an attentive audience here and online. I didn't know how impactful this occasion might be. I worked with Edna, Jordan, and her colleagues Larry and Helen for the past few months, really, because our first deadline was in March. That was before the Taoiseach got COVID when he was in the States. I'm an optimist by nature, and 20 years, the last 20 years living and working in Northern Ireland increased my optimism, because every day that I woke up, I was conscious of how things were improving in the most basic of ways. I sometimes used to, at bad times politically, I used to go to the Lost Lives book and just consult it and see the terrible killing that took place on our island in our lifetime. And I knew that every day when that level of violence was decreasing was a good day. And that trend continues. And some of the questions that were raised here today in relation to, say, the instability in the political structure in Northern Ireland, I think we have to remind ourselves that, you know, the Good Friday Agreement will only be 25 years young next year, that the current iteration, on-off iteration of power sharing between Sinn Féin and the DUP, who are at the extremes of politics, that only started in, was it May 2007? So that's 15 years. Like, this state here is 100 years old. And I think what an occasion like this has done for me is it shows the way the kind of shared island philosophy that's at the heart of, say, that shared island unit, that's deepening its roots within the structure, that there is the basis for further contact, for further engagement, for further funding, which is important, but for further analysis as well. That's the big achievement. That's the big, I suppose, get from the NESC report. And that is a significant incremental advance, and more work will follow from it. So I think it's very, very worthy work. I just bring to your attention, that's Angel over there in blue, and her colleagues. Angel Dunn, who runs the Shared Islands unit. She's a very modest person, but she's also very, very able. I've known her for a long time, met her first in Spain, I think, when she was based in the embassy there. And she is really committed to this work, as are her colleagues in what is a small unit based here. I think it was fascinating to hear the Taoiseach say that commitment is rock solid to funding, not for 5 years, but for 10 years. That's a lot of commitment in political terms, to say that's there. So that's something to build on. And finally, on your behalf, as well as thanking NESC and all the people who were involved in this work, I'd like to draw attention to the facilities company, Grooveyard, who did such excellent work, providing sound and vision, laying out the tables here, and just providing all the backup facilities which made this day tick and move. So with that in mind, wish you a safe journey to wherever you're traveling. Thanks to our audience online, and I hope that you too believe that this was a good day. Thank you.